Chapter 10: Revolution and Nationhood. The sporadic and fragmented uprisings against the Spaniards gave birth to the concept of nationhood. Exploitations and abusement did not weld the people into one, for there is missing material basis in building a nation. The lack of communication faculties and the colonial policy of deliberately keeping the people in a state of ignorance by severely limiting educational opportunities and suppressing the dissemination of a new further ideas delayed the growth of a national consciousness. These articulators were the Ilustrados. These young men were able to take advantage of the educational opportunities that a liberalized Spanish colonial policy offered at the time. Their knowledge was a result of the external reality of their position within that environment, but the expression of their thoughts would aid in mobilizing forces to affect changes in the emerging nation and its people. The emergence of the Filipino notion coincided with the development of the nationhood. The Creoles, who were Spaniards born in the Philippines, were the only ones who were referred to be Filipinos. Initially, the term Filipino had a racial and snobbish meaning. With the economic progress, the Chinese mestizos and urbanized natives became considered as the Filipino, even if they had established an allegiance to the Philippines as a distinctive element. People who identified as Filipinos were still Spanish-oriented. The Creoles, Spanish mestizos, Chinese mestizos, and urbanized natives had benefited from economic progress and now had an economic basis to conserve. Those who pushed for reforms in Spain had more freedom to express themselves. It was hoped that if the Spanish government was made aware of what was truly going on in the colony, improvements would follow. Three organizations formed the nucleus of the reform movement that became famous as the propaganda movement. First, the group of suspected filibusterismo. Second, formed by refugees who escaped persecution. Third, was formed by Graciano Lopez Haina and Marcelo H. del Pilar. Jose Rizal developed a widely renowned leader among those who studied in Spain. His insightful analysis of Philippine society, no limitang here, gained him the animosity of the friars and was promptly outlawed in the Philippines. The ambition to construct a totally Filipino organization was realized when La Solidaridad was founded in Barcelona on December 13, 1888. Galisano Apacible, Rizal's cousin, was the head of La Solidaridad. In London, Rizal was designated honorary president. The propaganda movement was a reform and national consciousness movement that began in the late 1800s among young Filipino expatriates. Despite the fact that its supporters declared loyalty to the Spanish colonial administration, the movement was ruthlessly suppressed by Spanish authorities who murdered its most renowned member, Jose Rizal. The propaganda movement claimed freedom of the press, expression and assembly, equal treatment under the law, involvement in good governance, and social and political liberty for Filipinos through the pages of La Solidaridad. The propagandists' goal remained integration, notwithstanding their critics and concerns. Grant liberties so that no one can conspire, deputies so that their grievances and grumblings don't pile up in the bosoms of families and become the source of future storms. Despite all of this, the Revolutionary War could not have happened without the effect of propaganda. La Solidaridad, Rizal's novels, and other propaganda materials had a little circulation, but they reached the local Ilustrados, who, in most cases, became the leaders of the revolutionary movements in their regions. Rizal's formation of the Liga Filipina upon his return to the Philippines in July 1892 marked a step forward in the Reformation concepts of the time, in the sense that the new group needed to directly incorporate the people in the reform campaign. Many segments of society seeking change were drawn to the Liga among them, including Andres Bonifacio, who became one of the organization's founders. The Liga's goals were listed in the constitution Rizal drafted. Number 1, to combine the entire archipelago into one compact, vigorous, and homogeneous body. Number 2, mutual protection in all wants and needs. Number 3, defense against all aggression and injustice. Number 4, encouragement of education, agriculture, and commerce. And number 5, study and application of improvements. Apolinario Mabini was appointed as the Supreme Council Secretary. On his advice, the organization resolved to announce support for La Solidaridad and the reforms it sought, generate cash for the paper, and spend all of its expenses campaigning for the country in front of the Spanish Cortes. Bonifacio, in particular, made significant efforts to establish chapters in several Manila districts. The Liga broke into two groups, the Cuerpo de Compromisarios and the Katipunan, fearful that the more conservative rank-and-file members would seize control of the organization and hesitant to participate in an enterprise. The Ilustrados, like the rising classes from which they sprang, were both reformists and revolutionaries because their attitude shifted between the governing and the underclasses. Because they saw themselves as social rulers, their frustrations compelled them to engage to the people. In terms of consciousness, peasants' awareness was similar to that of peasants all over the world. Peasants also supported counter-revolutionary organizations such as Guardias de Honor. The revolution quickly spread and frequently voluntarily to other areas that the yearning to be free of the Spanish yoke became worldwide over the centuries. Many peasant rebellions were headed by local elites who were still regarded as traditional rulers. Economic prosperity itself enabled a better awareness of common suffering and tyranny in Manila. Because of the monopoly had control over more than tobacco farming, the government established 5 factories in Manila. The gathering of thousands of workers at a single time compelled them to recognize their Filipino solidarity interest. Economic advancements such as the successful production of cash crops for export has increased exploitation and misery in a variety of ways, causing depression among the masses' living conditions. Some Mingculinos or middleman landowners staged agricultural uprisings against the Jesuits, but the operations against the religious companies garnered widespread support. This is the continuation of the Chapter 10 Revolution and Nationhood. It covers the land question up to the Ilustrado imprint. Starting on pointing the important details, the friars are forcing the people to work as tenants on their own land. When the unstable currency in 1891 to 1895 started, conflicts and problems had bloomed, and most of the normal Filipinos that were living with the oppression had gone through a lot of suffering. The hemp and sugar prices fell, and important goods were in demand because of unfavorable exchange. This started problems that led to economic inequality. With this remain unsolved, another problem had arose that led the friars to their near end. In June and July of 1896, fields of the provinces of Central Luzon were destroyed. When it was destroyed, the friars refused to regard rent and asked for increase that made people furious. This had led to economic crisis, and the Ilustrado tried to seek parity on economics and politics with the Spaniards. But it only led to disappointment on Filipinos. Due to this, Filipinos able to form the Katipunan. The Katipunan emerged and saw Filipinos as equals and brothers. Through the Katipunan's approach, it led leaders to an inescapable goal of independence. These points influence the historical progression really well because you can see the progress from the important details. From forcing the Filipinos to seeking equality, then creating Katipunan to have freedom. You can see how the Filipinos were abused and brainwashed and slowly standing up for their rights after a long time. Andres Bonifacio had inspired many Filipinos and overthrew the colonizers. These points helped to gain independence despite hardships and oppression. I agree with the analysis of the author because it shows progress and the people's courage to get out of the Spanish oppression. The fact that the Ilustrado tried to talk to the Spaniards for equality showed courage even though it was unsuccessful. So in my opinion, the Filipinos were really trying hard when someone stood up to create Katipunan. They stood up for our rights and our independence. The revolution started after Spanish authorities discovered that the Katipunan were plotting against their colonizers, and we gained our independence in the end. In my analysis, the important details connects to each pieces even though some of the details were showing that Filipinos were really oppressed by the Spanish colonizers. Unfortunately, the friars made a reason for the Filipinos to stand up for themselves. I noticed that due to the oppression, the Filipinos' love for the country started to become invisible. But the Katipunan was there to show unity and stronger love for the country. The Katipunan's goal became an inspiration to many Filipinos. Also, if Marcelo del Pilar did not give letters or left letters to Bonifacio, maybe he made wrong decisions and possibly did not end the oppression. I also love the courage that the Ilustrado had shown in the chapter because standing up for the country in that time may had been hard and Rizal ended up going to prison because of that. These are the photos of the Ilustrados, Marcelo H. del Pilar, and Andres Bonifacio. I never read on the chapter that the Katipunan tore their cedulas and I want to share it in my discussion because it was very iconic. The cedulas, if you are not aware what that was, it is a reminder of Spanish tyranny against Filipinos who were branded as Indios. It was according to Sunstar Philippines. Andres Bonifacio and some Katipuneros tore their cedula to show that they're protesting against the Spanish colonial rule.
Sabay-sabay natin puritin ang mga sala! Mabuhay ang revolusyon!
Also, since my part from this chapter started on the land question, I never got the chance to explain Rizal's Liga and I want to share the meaning and the goal of the Ilustrados. Well, the Ilustrado means erudite or enlightened ones. Their goal was to fight for the political rights of the Filipino. I almost forgot to share the last part of my analysis. Bonifacio and the other leaders belonged to intermediate classes, allowing to have conflict between classes because others felt like they cannot view a society. Then, there had been conflicts about independence and lack of democracy among Filipinos. They also failed to detect who will become leaders that will be the cause of struggle for our leadership. They did not detect how they will have democracy after independence. To summarize my discussion, the Filipinos were oppressed, then later on had the courage to ask for parity with the help of Ilustrados, which the goal was to fight for our political rights, but then failed. Then created the Katipunan and fought for our independence. After that, we struggle on democracy and who will lead the country. But the rules of conduct states proper attitude towards women and regarding brotherly cooperation and many suggestions for good behavior. So, they are starting to teach the Filipinos good behaviors. But a conflict came about the classes of Bonifacio and other leaders, making it suspicious if they can view a society. So, you have reached the end of my discussion and I hope that you understand what I have been saying back there. And thank you so much for watching. Bye!